Over dinner, the candlelight flickered across her face, illuminating the sharp glint in her eyes that I had seen only once before, when she was determined to get what she wanted. I had been waiting for this evening, a quiet, intimate dinner meant to celebrate our engagement. Instead, it turned into a battlefield of words. "Before we go any further," she said, her fork pausing mid-air, "I think we need to talk about a prenup." The words hit me like a sudden chill. A prenup. At first, I smiled politely, assuming it was a precaution, a modern gesture of caution that didn't necessarily mean distrust. But the way she leaned back, with a subtle smirk and a challenging glint in her eyes, told me this was something more than a formality, it was a test. "Of course," I said smoothly, masking the curiosity and suspicion swirling inside me. "Let's discuss it." I sipped my wine slowly, watching her carefully, letting her think she had the upper hand. She began outlining her terms: protection of assets, strict clauses about property, limits on gifts, inheritance, and a long list of conditions that seemed almost designed to make me uncomfortable. Her tone was firm, assertive, and, I realized with a sinking heart, strategic. She wasn't just talking about legal protection, she was testing me, measuring how I would react, how much I would bend. I smiled again, calm, unshaken. There was a pause as she studied me, expecting hesitation, expecting frustration, expecting fear. But I had something she couldn't know, something that would completely change the dynamic of the evening. "Do you really think this is necessary?" I asked, leaning forward, my eyes locking with hers. "After all, we've shared everything, our dreams, our plans, our future. Why start our marriage with distrust?" She tilted her head, a hint of challenge in her smirk. "It's not about distrust," she said smoothly. "It's about protecting ourselves. Modern marriages require security, don't they?" I nodded, as though I agreed, my mind already racing. I had known she was ambitious, careful, perhaps even calculating, but tonight, I had to reveal something. Something that would turn the table completely, without a single raised voice. "Protection," I said, letting the word hang in the air. "You want protection. But perhaps the truth will protect you better than any contract ever could." Her smirk faltered slightly, curiosity flickering across her face. "The truth," she echoed, leaning forward now, sensing a shift. I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile, and reached into my pocket. From the sleek leather wallet, I pulled out a small stack of papers. They weren't legal contracts, they were something far more revealing. "I knew you were thinking about this," I said softly, and I wanted to be honest. Completely honest. Not with words, but with facts. I slid the papers across the table. She looked down, her eyes narrowing, scanning the pages. The first page was a record, bank statements, yes, but not mine. Ones that showed that over the past 6 months, every large gift she had bought, every expensive weekend getaway, every sudden acquisition of designer goods, had been funded entirely by her own accounts. Each transaction carefully documented. She had always been proud of her independence, but here, in black and white, the truth revealed something she hadn't expected. Her money was her shield, not mine, but the reality of it showed her choices in a stark light. Then I laid out a second truth, more personal, more intimate. A series of messages, innocuous on the surface, but revealing the level of care, attention, and generosity I had shown over the years. Notes, reminders, small gifts, silent gestures, sacrifices she hadn't acknowledged but I had kept. Evidence of my patience, my loyalty, my commitment. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages. How did you, she began, but I raised a finger. "Listen," I said calmly. "You think a prenup can protect you from loss, from betrayal, from disappointment. But a contract can't protect you from truth. And the truth is, I know everything. I know your ambitions, your desires, your expectations. And I also know what I've given, and what I will continue to give. Not because I have to, but because I choose to. Because our marriage should be built on honesty, not fear. Her eyes searched mine, a mixture of admiration, shock, and a hint of defensiveness. The smile she had worn at the beginning of the evening, the confident, almost challenging smirk, was gone. She realized now that this wasn't about money, or property, or legal boundaries. This was about understanding the depth of what we both had to offer, and what we both risked if we started with mistrust. I reached across the table and took her hand, letting the silence linger for a long, deliberate moment. A prenup, I said softly, is nothing compared to trust, respect, and truth. If we start our marriage trying to protect ourselves from each other, then perhaps we shouldn't marry at all. But if we can face everything honestly, openly, without pretense, then no contract will ever be necessary. Her lips parted, her hand tightening slightly around mine. The fire in her eyes returned, but this time it was tempered with reflection. She hadn't expected this approach, hadn't anticipated a man who didn't react with anger, resentment, or negotiation. I had chosen strategy, patience, and subtle revelation, the silent unveiling of facts that couldn't be argued with. "Are you saying you don't care about a prenup?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying," I replied, "that if we start with truth, nothing else matters. Our future isn't built on papers. It's built on the choices we make every day, together or apart." There was a long pause. The candle between us flickered as if in acknowledgement of the weight of my words. And then, finally, she smiled, not the challenging smirk of earlier, but a genuine, almost relieved smile. "I underestimated you," she said softly. "I thought a prenup was the only way to be safe. But I see now that trust, honesty, that's protection enough." I nodded, leaning back in my chair, letting the tension dissolve into the warm glow of the dining room. The food, the wine, the music, it all seemed to settle into a quiet harmony that hadn't existed before. She reached across the table and touched my arm, a silent acknowledgement that the conversation was over, but the understanding we had reached would last far longer than any contract. Over dinner, she had demanded a prenup, expecting confrontation, negotiation, perhaps even compromise. Instead, she received truth, patience, and clarity. And in that moment, I realized that marriage wasn't about fear of loss or property. It was about seeing each other fully, accepting the past, and choosing to move forward, together. The rest of the evening passed in easy conversation, laughter, and gentle teasing. But in the quiet of my mind, I knew the impact of that dinner would last far beyond the candles, the wine, and the restaurant walls. It wasn't the prenup that had mattered, it was the revelation of what truly mattered: honesty, respect, and the quiet power of truth.